I'm 62 years old now, and wow, let me tell you, I used to think playing it safe was the best way to live, keeping my feelings, friends, and even love all steady and calm. I got married when I was young, raised 2 great kids, and stood by my husband through every up and down in his job. For me, love was all about being quiet, steady, and easy to predict. And that felt just right. But then, one single evening flipped everything I thought I knew about myself upside down. I never imagined something like this could happen to little old me. Please, don't make the same mistake I did thinking you have to stay stuck forever. My husband's company had just finished another one of those quarterly dinners, the kind that's a bit fancy but not too much, and we hosted it at our house like we always did since Gary got his big promotion. He liked making it personal, he said. It helped his team feel really valued. I was okay with it. I'd always been the quiet hostess, setting out wine glasses just so, folding those cloth napkins perfectly, and chatting lightly with the same old faces. That night, folks stuck around longer than usual. The fire pit in the backyard was glowing, all warm and orange, and the air had that fresh, cool breeze you get in Southern California during late spring. I remember standing by the kitchen island, rinsing out a wine glass, and watching the end of a chat between Gary and one of his work buddies, a guy named Robert. Robert had been on Gary's team for a couple of years, but I'd only said hello and goodbye to him before nothing deep. He was a bit younger than us, maybe in his late 50s, tall, and the type who makes people pay attention when he speaks. Not super charming or pushy, just really there in the moment. Still, I never really noticed him much. Not for real. Eventually, everyone started heading out. I stacked up the dessert plates and said thanks as they left through the front door. Robert was the last one there. "I'll help you bring in the chairs," he offered, already picking up the ones by the fire pit. I should have said no. I almost did, but I didn't. "All right," I said, wiping my hands on a towel. "Thank you." We worked without talking much for a bit, and the night felt like it was wrapping us up cozy. The quiet wasn't awkward. It was just full, you know what I mean? He carried 2 chairs into the garage while I grabbed the cushions. When he came back, he stopped in the doorway and looked at me. Really looked. "Do you ever get tired of doing all this?" he asked. I blinked. "What do you mean this?" He waved his hand around at the house. "Hosting, smiling, playing your part." I felt a little spark in my chest, like a tiny change. "It's not playing a part," I said. "It's just life." He nodded slowly, but I could tell he still had that question in his eyes. "Yeah, I guess it is." We stood there quiet again. The air between us felt tight, like an invisible string pulled super snug. "I should get going," he said at last. I walked him to the front door. My hand brushed against his as I opened it, and for a second, the warmth of his skin stuck with me way longer than it should have. "Thanks for the help," I said, my voice coming out softer than I planned. He stepped out, turned and looked at me. Really looked. "You're more than this, you know," he said. And then he was gone. I closed the door, my heart pounding in my ears like I'd just run a whole mile. I leaned against the frame, staring at the empty hallway, trying to figure out why a simple talk had shaken something loose inside me. Something I hadn't felt in years. Gary came in from the backyard a few minutes later, smiling and chatting about some work numbers he and Robert had talked about by the fire. I smiled and nodded, but I couldn't stop thinking about what Robert had said. "You're more than this, you know." That night, I lay awake in bed next to my husband of 38 years and wondered, not for the first time, who I really was under all the daily routines. The taking care of everyone, the years of being good, and if someone I didn't expect had, just seen that real me clearer than I ever had. The next morning, the house was quiet in that comfy, familiar way. Gary had already left for the office, his travel mug gone from the counter, and his cologne still hanging faintly in the air. I made myself a cup of tea and stood by the window, looking out at the backyard where the embers from last night's fire pit were now cold and grey. I tried to shake it off. I told myself it was just a moment, a quick flash of something new. But as I stood there, I realized it wasn't just about Robert. It was about me. It had been years since anyone looked at me like that or asked me a question. That wasn't about dinner or plans. I'd spent so long looking after everyone else's lives that I'd kind of lost track of my own. Around noon, I got a text from an unknown number. "Thank you again for last night. I hope I didn't overstep." I stared at it, not sure how to feel. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. "It's fine. You didn't." I added, almost without thinking, "It was unexpected." He replied right away. Sometimes unexpected is exactly what we need. I set the phone down, my heart thudding again. I shouldn't have replied. But I didn't delete the messages either. That weekend, Gary invited me to one of his work lunches where spouses can come or not. I said no thanks. He didn't push, which somehow hurt more than if he had. Instead, I spent the afternoon walking around the local farmers market by myself. The bright colors of ripe tomatoes and wildflowers all blurred together as I thought about the weird knot in my chest. I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't unhappy. But I couldn't stop thinking about how easily Robert had seen right through me. Like he was the first person in years who even tried. The next time I saw him, it wasn't planned. I just dropped off some baked goods at Gary's office for their monthly team meeting, something I'd done for years without thinking twice. I was heading back to my car when I heard someone say my name. "Margaret." I turned. There he was, Robert, holding a to-go cup, standing kind of casually near the curb. "I didn't know you were here," I said. He smiled, his eyes warm. "I saw you walking across the lot. Wanted to say hi." I nodded, trying to ignore the flutter in my stomach. "Well, hi." We stood there, with traffic humming softly in the distance. Then he asked, "Can I walk you to your car?" I hesitated, then nodded. We walked slowly, talking lightly at first about the weather, weekend plans, and a quick comment about the lemon bars I'd brought. But when we got to my car, he paused. "I meant what I said the other night," he said. I swallowed. "I know. You don't have to answer me. I just ... I see something in you. Something bright that's been dimmed." I looked down, gripping my purse strap, tighter than I needed to. "It's complicated." "I know," he said gently. "But just because something's complicated doesn't mean it's wrong to want more. Even if it's just to feel seen." That word again. Seen. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. He stepped back, giving me space. "Take care, Margaret." I watched him walk away, my chest aching in a way that scared me, not because of him, but because I realized how little of myself I'd paid attention to in decades. That night, I didn't tell Gary about the conversation. I told myself it didn't matter. It was nothing. But deep down, I knew a quiet door had opened, and I wasn't sure I could close it again. The days after that felt like they moved in slow motion, like I was watching my own life from behind a window. I still cooked dinner. I still folded laundry. I still laughed at Gary's jokes over the evening news. But underneath it all, something had changed. I wasn't fully there. A part of me had drifted somewhere else, and I hated myself for it. I didn't text Robert. He didn't reach out either. But his words stuck with me like a song you can't get out of your head, soft, always there, hard to ignore. Then one Thursday afternoon, Gary called to say he'd be staying late at the office for a conference call with their regional team. "I'll just grab dinner with the guys," he said. "Don't wait up." I told him okay, my voice calm. Inside, my thoughts started swirling. I made myself a light salad, left the dishes in the sink, and went out to the porch with a glass of wine. The sky was getting dim, with streaks of orange and purple mixing into the horizon. I sat alone in the quiet, listening to the wind rustle through the trees. At some point, I picked up my phone. Without thinking too hard, I typed, "Are you free to talk?" I stared at the screen. I could still delete it. I could still pretend nothing happened. But I hit send. A few seconds later, the reply came. "I'm close by. 5 minutes. 5 minutes." I sat up straighter, my heart thudding against my ribs like a warning. 5 minutes later, headlights swept across the driveway. I met him at the door. Neither of us said anything for a moment. "You okay?" he asked gently. I nodded. I don't really know why I texted. "Yes, you do." There was no judging in his voice, just understanding. I stepped aside to let him in. We didn't go far. Just sat in the living room with a full cushion between us, the quiet humming louder than any words. "I keep asking myself what this is," I said after a long pause. "Is it loneliness? Boredom? A midlife unraveling?" He smiled a little. "Maybe it's just truth. Something trying to break through." I looked at him. Really looked. His face was kind. Steady. He wasn't trying to charm me or act fake. He was just there. "I haven't felt seen in a long time," I said, my voice cracking. He leaned forward a bit. "You deserve to be." My breath caught. A single tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. "I'm not looking to hurt anyone," I whispered. "Neither am I." He reached for my hand, not pushy, just gentle and open. And I let him take it. It was warm, comforting, real. The moment hung there like a breath you hold in. Then slowly, I let my head rest on his shoulder. We sat like that for a long time. No words, no moving, just the quiet, close understanding of two people who'd both been going through life feeling invisible for way too long. When he finally stood to leave, I didn't stop him. I walked him to the door and held his gaze for one last moment. "Thank you," I said. He nodded. "For what it's worth, you're not alone in this." When the door closed behind him, I didn't feel guilty. I felt known, and it scared me how much I needed that. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. The house was still, with shadows curling in the bedroom corners like old memories. Gary was snoring softly beside me, his chest rising and falling as steady as it had for nearly 4 decades. I stared at the ceiling and listened to my own breathing. Something had changed. Not in the big, dramatic way people might think. There had been no affair, no breaking of trust with my body, but something deeper inside. A shift in me that I couldn't ignore or brush off anymore. For so long, I defined myself by the roles I played: wife, mom, hostess, caretaker. I did them well, sometimes even beautifully, but somewhere along the way, I'd stopped asking what I needed or who I was beyond everyone else's needs. That night with Robert, it wasn't about him. It was about remembering myself. Later that day, Gary came home from work and kissed me on the cheek, just like always. We ate dinner in silence. The TV buzzed in the background with something forgettable about fixing houses or baking contests. He didn't notice I wasn't really watching. "I've been thinking," I said suddenly, my voice louder than I meant. He looked over, surprised. "About what?" "I want to take a trip by myself, just a few days." He blinked. "A trip?" "Yes. I found a cabin up near Mendocino. It's quiet, private. I just ... I think I need some space to think, to breathe." He stared at me for a long moment. Is something wrong? No, I said, and for once I meant it. I just need to find out what's right. The next morning, I packed a small suitcase, kissed Gary goodbye, and drove north. The cabin was tucked between tall redwood trees, with fog twisting through the branches like soft silk. There was no TV, no internet, no noise except birds singing and leaves rustling. I lit a fire, made tea, and sat for hours with a journal. In my lap, writing down thoughts I hadn't said out loud in years. I didn't contact Robert. I didn't need to, because this wasn't about chasing someone new. It was about rediscovering the woman I'd been before all the routines took over, before I became invisible even to myself. On the third day, I stood at the edge of a cliff looking out over the Pacific Ocean. The wind tangled in my hair, the salty air sharp on my skin, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. When I got back home, Gary was waiting. He didn't ask questions right away, but a few nights later he turned to me in bed and said quietly, "You've changed." I took his hand in mine. Maybe I finally came back to myself. He didn't speak, just held on tighter. We're still together. We still laugh, still argue about silly things, still fall asleep to the hum of the same TV shows. But now there's honesty. Between us, a quiet understanding that we both have more growing to do on our own, and as a team. As for Robert, he stays as a moment, a turning point, not a big scandal or secret. Just a mirror held up at the perfect time. If you've ever looked at your own life and wondered where you went, don't wait for someone else to give you the answer. You're allowed to ask for more, to change, to start over. I did, and I'm still learning how. But I'm here now,